At 6:47 in the morning on March 12, 1944, Corporal James Jimmy Dalton was hiding in a muddy ditch outside Cassino, Italy. He was watching a German armored scout car driving toward him at 15 miles per hour. He had no weapons to stop tanks, no mines, no grenades. He only had a piece of old barbed wire wrapped around a shovel handle. Every officer in the 34th Infantry Division had told him he was not allowed to use it. In the next 90 seconds, that homemade tripwire would change the rules and save an entire company from being destroyed. The official U.S. Army book listed 16 approved ways to stop light armor. Dalton's way wasn't one of them. The battalion commanders had threatened to punish him in military court twice for making unauthorized changes in the field that could hurt his own men. But rules don't matter much when you've watched 11 men die in 3 weeks because the approved methods need equipment nobody has. Dalton pulled the wire tight. The morning fog covered the Lirei Valley like wet cotton. He could hear the Sd.Kfz 222's engine grinding through the gears. The commander's door was open. He was probably looking for the American positions everyone knew were there. The wire shook in his hands. One chance. He waited. Jimmy Dalton grew up in Gary, Indiana, where his father worked at the blast furnaces at U.S. Steel. He worked 15-hour shifts with hot, melted iron for a paycheck that barely paid for rent and food for 6 kids. Jimmy was the middle child. He spent afternoons at the train yards instead of school. He learned which train cars carried what, which parts broke most often, and how to make quick fixes with whatever scrap metal he could find. At 17, he was learning to be a switchman. The work taught him to think about how things work together. He learned to see how one broken part could cause another problem. A loose pin could make 6 train cars go off the tracks. A worn cable could snap and kill a worker. You learn to spot problems before they become disasters. And you learn to fix them with wire, rope, and creativity because the company sure wasn't buying new equipment. He joined the Army in January 1943. 3 months after his 19th birthday. The recruiter promised training, steady pay, and a chance to see the world. Dalton got 8 weeks of basic training, a rifle he'd never shot before, and a boat ride to North Africa. By the time he got to Italy in September 1943, he'd seen enough of the world to know the recruiter had lied about everything else too. The 34th Infantry Division fought its way up Italy like a slow-moving stone. Every village had a fight. Every hill had German machine guns. Every river crossing cost lives. But what killed more Americans than enemy bullets was German scouting. Light armored cars and half-tracks checked out U.S. positions at sunrise and sunset. They called an artillery fire on any groups of troops they found. The Sd.Kfz 222 was the German Army's favorite. It had 4 wheels, was open on top, and had a 20mm autocannon and an MG-34 machine gun. It was fast enough to escape, armored enough to bounce off rifle bullets, and light enough to drive on mountain roads the Tigers and Panthers couldn't use. They'd appear out of nowhere, shoot at a position with cannon fire, and disappear before anyone could fight back. American rules said to fight scout vehicles with anti-tank rifles, bazookas, or mines. The problem was simple. Nobody had any. The 34th had 9 bazookas for the entire division. Anti-tank rifles had been gotten rid of. Mines were saved for defensive positions, not daily patrols. So soldiers died while scout cars mapped their positions and called in the artillery that killed them 12 hours later. Private First Class Eddie Kowalski died on February 18, 1944. A 222 drove past his foxhole at sunrise. Kowalski shot his M1 Garand. The bullets bounced off the armor. The scout car's MG-34 shot back. Kowalski took 3 bullets in the chest. He was 20 years old, from Pittsburgh, a machinist's son who'd joined the Army with Dalton on the same day. Sergeant Mike Brennan died on February 23rd. Another 222. Another morning patrol. Brennan tried to hit it with a grenade from 30 yards away. He missed. The autocannon found him. He had taught Dalton how to set up a fighting position, how to read the land, and how to keep your feet dry in the Italian mud. He was 24, from Brooklyn. He had 4 sisters. His mother would get the telegram on March 2nd. Corporal Luis Vargas died on March 4th. Same pattern. The 222s were getting braver. This one drove right through the company's position at sunset, machine gun shooting. Vargas was from El Paso. He spoke better Spanish than English. He always shared his cigarettes, even when he only had 3 left. The autocannon caught him running for cover. The medic couldn't stop the bleeding. By early March 1944, the 34th Infantry Division had lost 47 men to scout vehicles in 6 weeks. Not battles, not attacks, just scout cars doing their job while Americans had no answer. Dalton watched each one. He knew Kowalski and Brennan personally. Vargas had been in his squad. Each death felt like it could have been stopped. Each death made him angrier. The official response from the battalion was predictable. Stay in defensive positions. Save anti-tank weapons. Wait for new supplies. Captain Morrison held a meeting after Vargas died. 20 exhausted soldiers in a barn that smelled like gunpowder and wet wool. Higher command knows about the scout problem, Morrison said. His uniform was cleaner than theirs. He'd arrived from division headquarters that morning. New bazooka shipments are expected within a month. Until then, stay disciplined and follow the rules. Dalton stood in the back. He'd been thinking about the problem for weeks. The Gary train yards had taught him that when you can't get new equipment, you make do with what you have. The scout cars always used the same roads. They moved fast, but in predictable ways. And they had one weakness nobody was using: their wheels. Sir, Dalton said, what if we put wire across the roads, low to the ground, tight enough to catch the axles? Morrison looked at him like he'd suggested using paper airplanes. Corporal, the field manual is very clear on approved ways to stop vehicles. Wire barriers are defensive measures that need specific positioning and support. They're not booby traps. But sir, the answer is no. We're not setting random tripwires that could hurt our own men. Dismissed. Dalton said nothing, but he didn't forget. The scout cars kept coming. More men kept dying. The approved methods needed equipment they didn't have. The unauthorized method needed wire, shovels, and a willingness to risk military punishment. On the night of March 10th, 1944, Dalton made his decision. Another 222 had killed 2 men that afternoon, Privates Chun and Harrison. Chun was a radio operator from San Francisco. Harrison was from Oklahoma and always talked about his farm. Both dead because a scout car drove through at 4 p.m. and nobody could stop it. Dalton waited until midnight. The company was dug in along the Rapido River Valley, 2 miles south of Cassino. German positions were visible on the ridge to the north. The scout cars used a dirt road that ran alongside the Allied lines about 400 yards out. It was a predictable route with tree cover, perfect for scouting. He grabbed a roll of barbed wire from the supply area. 30 feet, rusty but strong. He took 2 digging tools, the standard folding shovels every soldier carried, and he went out alone. No permission, no backup, no witnesses. The March night was cold. Mud pulled at his boots. He could hear artillery booming to the north, constant and distant like thunder that never stopped. The road was empty, but that didn't mean it was safe. German patrols used it, too. If they caught him out here, he was dead or captured. He found a spot where the road got narrow between 2 oak trees. Good view from the American lines, limited view from the German side until you were right on top of it. He drove the first shovel into the ground on the left side of the road, angling it back toward the American positions. The blade went 6 inches into the mud. Not deep enough. He used a rock to pound it deeper. 12 inches. Stable. The second shovel went in on the right side, 18 feet across. He measured it by walking and counting steps. Then came the wire. He wrapped it around the first shovel's handle. 3 times around, as tight as he could make it. His hands were slippery with mud and rust. The wire cut into his palms. He could feel blood mixing with the cold. He stretched the wire across the road at exactly 14 inches off the ground. Not ankle height, not waist height, axle height for a light armored car. He'd measured destroyed 222 2 weeks ago during a patrol. The front axle sat 13 to 15 inches, depending on weight. The wire had to catch it at speed without breaking. He wrapped the other end around the second shovel 3 times again. Then he tested how tight it was by pulling. The wire hummed. The shovels held. Too loose, and it would snap. Too tight, and it would break. He adjusted, tightened, tested again. The wire sang when he plucked it. The whole setup took 23 minutes. He sat in the ditch afterward, catching his breath, watching the road. If a patrol came now, he'd have to run. If an officer found out, military court. If it worked, maybe fewer men would die. That was the decision. Simple math from the train yards. Risk versus reward. He buried the wire under a thin layer of mud. Not enough to weaken it, just enough to make it invisible in low light. The shovels were already rusty and dirty. They looked like abandoned equipment. Someone would have to be looking right at them to notice, and by the time they did, it would be too late. Dalton crawled back to the American lines at 1:15 a.m. He didn't tell anyone. He couldn't. Morrison had been clear. This was not allowed. This broke the rules. This was exactly the kind of doing things on your own that got you punished in the Army, even if it saved lives. He lay in his foxhole and waited for sunrise. The wire was out there, tight and invisible, waiting. The scout car showed up at 6:43 a.m. on March 12, 1944. Dalton was on watch, eating cold food from a tin can. The morning fog was thick enough to cut. Then he heard it, the unique sound of a German straight-six engine. Sd.Kfz 222 coming from the north at medium speed. He didn't move, didn't call out. Nobody else had heard it yet. The car came out of the fog at 600 yards. Gray paint. Commander's door open. Moving at what Dalton guessed was 15 miles per hour. Routine patrol. They weren't expecting a fight. 500 yards. Dalton could see the commander now, looking through binoculars. The gunner was moving the 20mm gun around, probably out of boredom more than worry. 400 yards. The car stayed on the road. Perfect. 300 yards. Dalton's hands were shaking. This either worked or it didn't. If it didn't, the scout car would find them and call artillery. If it did, he'd broken direct orders and there'd be punishment. He didn't care. Chun and Harrison had died 2 days ago. Vargas, Brennan, Kowalski before them. The list was too long. 200 yards. The car sped up slightly, probably wanted to get through the area quickly. 50 yards from the wire. Dalton could see the front wheels clearly now. Covered in mud, spinning fast. The wire caught the front right wheel at 6:47 a.m. What happened next was immediate and violent. The wheel locked. The axle seized. But the car's forward motion was too strong. 15 miles per hour meant 22 feet per second. The locked wheel acted like a pivot point. The entire vehicle flipped. It happened in pieces. First, the front went down, then the back lifted. The commander had maybe half a second to realize what was happening before the car went vertical. It rolled once, twice, 3 times, tumbling down the road in a shower of mud and torn metal. It stopped upside down. Dalton was already moving. He grabbed his M1 rifle and ran toward the wreck, yelling for covering fire. Other soldiers poured out of their positions, rifles up. The scout car's engine was still running. The wheels were spinning uselessly in the air. Smoke poured from the engine. The commander was dead, thrown out during the second roll. His neck was broken. The gunner was trapped under the turret, unconscious and bleeding. The driver was crawling out through the windscreen, confused but alive. Dalton reached him first. The German was maybe 22, with blonde hair covered in blood. He looked up at Dalton and raised his hands. No fight left. Dalton pulled him out and handed him to Private Morrison, no relation to the captain. Then he saw the wire, still attached to the front axle, still wrapped around the rusty shovel handles. The shovels had been pulled out of the ground and dragged 20 feet. But the wire had held. Dalton unwrapped it quickly, rolled it up, and shoved it in his backpack before anyone could see clearly what had stopped the car. Captain Morrison arrived 6 minutes later. He looked at the flipped scout car, then at Dalton. "What happened?" "It flipped, sir. Must have hit something in the road." Morrison walked around the wreck. He was looking for mines, for bazooka damage, for something that made sense. He found nothing. The car was fine except for the roll damage. No holes, no blast marks, just one very destroyed scout car that had simply flipped. "Corporal, scout cars don't just flip." "Yes, sir." Morrison stared at him. He knew something was off, but the German was captured, the car was stopped, and nobody was dead. He let it go. "Get this vehicle written up. I want photographs and a report." "Yes, sir." By noon, Every soldier in the company knew something was wrong with the official story. Scout cars didn't flip themselves. But Dalton wasn't talking, and nobody else had seen what happened. Private Morrison, the one who'd taken the German prisoner, found Dalton cleaning his rifle at 2 p.m. What really happened out there? Dalton didn't look up. Car flipped. Jimmy, I saw a wire in your pack. I saw the shovels. Dalton stopped cleaning. He looked at Morrison for a long moment. They'd been in basic training together. Morrison was from Gary, too. South Side. They'd known each other since they were kids. If anyone would understand, it was him. You didn't see anything, Dalton said quietly. Morrison sat down. If I did see something, let's say, would it work again? Yes. Can you teach me? That night, after dark, Dalton showed Morrison how to set up the wire. 2 more shovels, 30 more feet of barbed wire, a different part of road, 300 yards north. Same height, same tightness, same burial. Morrison did it himself while Dalton watched. By March 15th, 6 soldiers knew the method. Dalton hadn't told them. Morrison had told one. That soldier told another. Word spread through the underground network that exists in every military unit, the whispered conversations that happen after officers go to sleep. Private Jackson set one up on the road to San Pietro. Private Ollie set one up near the Gurliano River. Corporal Williams put one across a trail the Germans used for night patrols. None of them had permission. None of them wrote it down. They just did it. The 2nd Sd.Kfz 222 hit Jackson's wire on March 18th. Same result. The car flipped, killed the commander, and injured the crew. Jackson was smart enough to remove the wire before anyone checked it out. The 3rd car hit Ali's trap on March 21st. This one didn't flip all the way, but it crashed hard enough to disable the vehicle. The crew left it behind. By March 25th, German scouting in the 34th Division area had dropped by 60%. The 222s were still checking things out, but they were moving slower, taking different routes, and being more careful. Something had changed, and they didn't know what. Lieutenant Klaus Richter of the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division noticed it first. Richter commanded a scout platoon, 3 222s, experienced crews. He'd been running patrols in the Cassino area since January. He knew the roads. He knew the American positions. And he knew that in the past 2 weeks, 3 of his scout cars had been destroyed in ways that made no sense. On March 27th, he looked at the wreckage of the latest loss himself. Sd.Kfz 222, number 237, flipped on the road to Savaro. Commander dead, gunner wounded. The driver said the car suddenly stopped to high speed. Richter crawled under the wreckage. The front axle was bent, but not broken. No mine damage. No explosive marks. But there were scrapes on the wheel housing. Scratches that showed something had caught the axle at high speed. Something thin and strong. He found a piece of wire stuck in the wheel well. Rustivad white. Standard issue. Could have been German or American, but the placement was on purpose. Someone had put it across the road at exactly the right height to catch a scout car's front axle. Richter reported what he found to Division Intelligence on March 29th. The report was doubtful. Barbed wire wouldn't stop a light armored car. The weight and speed were too great. But Richter insisted. 3 cars destroyed, all the same pattern, all unexplained until you thought about wire. German intelligence questioned, captured American soldiers. None of them knew anything about tripwires. They searched dead U.S. soldiers and found no papers about the trick. It wasn't in their books. It wasn't in their training. But it was happening. By early April, German scout units working around Cassino had standing orders to look for wire obstacles before moving forward. Scout cars moved at half speed. Commanders got out to check suspicious ground. The careful approach cut their effectiveness by 40%. The Americans didn't know why the Germans had suddenly become careful, but they noticed the patrols were less frequent and less aggressive. Artillery strikes called in by scouts dropped by half. Death from scout car attacks basically stopped. And still, officially, nobody knew about the tripwires. Captain Morrison figured it out on April 3rd, 1944. He was checking the company's defensive positions when he found Private Williams setting up a wire across a logging road. Same setup Dalton had used. 2 shovels, barbed wire at axle height. Williams froze when he saw the captain. Morrison looked at the wire, looked at Williams, walked over, and tested how tight it was himself. "Where'd you learn this?" Williams said nothing. "That's an order, Private." "Corporal Dalton, sir." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he took out his notebook and drew the setup. Measurements, angles, wire type. He asked Williams to show him how to install it while he watched. He took more notes. "How many have you set up?" "4, sir." "Results?" "1 hit. Scout car flipped. German crew captured." Morrison closed his notebook. "The field manual doesn't allow this method." "No, sir. I specifically ordered Dalton not to try homemade ways to stop vehicles." "Yes, sir." Morrison looked down the empty road. In the distance, artillery rumbled. The war was still happening. Men were still dying. And here was a method that worked, that needed no special equipment, that ordinary soldiers could do. That was saving lives. "Show me 2 more setups before dark. I want to see placement options for different ground." Williams blinked. "Sir, that's an order, Private." By April 10th, Morrison had written down 17 separate wire setups across the company's area. He'd talked to the soldiers who set them up, recorded the results, and figured out the success rate. 87% of scout cars that hit the wires were disabled. 0 friendly casualties. Total cost, 30 feet of barbed wire and 2 shovels. Equipment already in the supply chain. He wrote a report, 3 pages. Technical details, tactical recommendations, and numbers to prove it worked. He sent it up to battalion on April 12th. The response came back on April 19th. Method not allowed. Stop immediately. Breaks field manual rules about obstacle placement and fails to meet engineering safety standards. Morrison read the response twice. Then he filed it away and did nothing. The tripwire stayed up. The death rate stayed down. And officially, nothing was happening. The numbers told a story battalion couldn't ignore forever. In February 1944, before the tripwires, the 34th Infantry Division lost 47 men to scout vehicle attacks. In March, after the tripwires spread, they lost 12. In April, they lost 3. Scout vehicle sightings in the division area. February, 147. March, 89. April, 34. Artillery strikes called in by German scouts. February, 203. March, 127. April, 58. Someone in division staff noticed. Colonel Anderson, the division intelligence officer, pulled the casualty reports and saw the pattern. He sent people to investigate at the front lines in late April. They found the tripwires within 2 days. Anderson's response was practical. He couldn't officially approve a method that broke the rules, but he couldn't ignore results. His compromise was to do nothing. No orders to stop, no orders to continue. Just a memo that went nowhere and, turning a blind eye toward the front. In May 1944, the 34th Infantry Division was taken off the front line for rest and new equipment. Dalton's company was sent to a rear area near Naples. Real beds, hot food, no scout cars. On May 23rd, Dalton was called to division headquarters. He showed up in his cleanest uniform, which still looked like it had been through a war. Colonel Anderson met him in a tent office. "Corporal Dalton, I've read the reports about your wire method." "Sir, I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to ask you to train others." Dalton didn't expect that. Anderson explained. The 36th Infantry Division was taking over the 34th's area. They needed to know how to deal with scouts. The official anti-tank school was 3 weeks long and needed equipment the Army didn't have. Dalton's method took 1 night and materials from the supply area. "I can't make it official," Anderson said, "but I can assign you to a training detail. You teach the method to scout and sniper teams. We call it improvised obstacle placement in the paperwork. Nobody needs to know exactly what that means." Dalton spent 2 weeks in June 1944 teaching 60 soldiers how to set tripwires, placement, tension, hiding it, removal. Every detail he'd learned through trying and making mistakes. The soldiers were doubtful at first. Wire wouldn't stop armor. But Dalton showed them photographs of flipped scout cars and gave them death numbers. By July, the method had spread to 3 divisions. By August, it was in use across the Italian front. never officially written down, never in the training books. Just whispered knowledge that passed from unit to unit, soldier to soldier. Conservative guesses credit Dalton's tripwire method with destroying or disabling 43 German scout vehicles between March and August 1944. Those vehicles would have called in hundreds of artillery strikes. The strikes would have killed hundreds of soldiers. Lives saved, hard to calculate exactly, but easily in the 300 to 400 range. The official reports said the drop in scout casualties was due to improved defensive awareness and enhanced anti-tank capabilities. Dalton's name appeared in no reports. His invention received no award. The Army preferred it that way. Admitting that a corporal had solved a problem that stumped the engineering experts was bad for morale. James Dalton survived the war. He was discharged in November 1945 with the rank of sergeant and a combat infantryman badge. No medals for the tripwires. No recognition beyond what his fellow soldiers gave him, which was all he wanted anyway. He went back to Gary, Indiana. U.S. Steel hired him as a switchman in January 1946. Same train yards he'd worked before the war. Same parts and cables. He married a woman named Dorothy from East Chicago. They had 3 kids. He never talked much about Italy. When asked, he'd say he did his job and came home. Once a year on March 12th, he'd get phone calls from Morrison, Williams, and Jackson. They'd talk for a few minutes. Remember Chun and Brennan and Vargas? Remember the fog and the scout cars and the wire? In 1963, a military historian researching German scout losses in Italy found mentions of an unexplained increase in vehicle rollovers in early 1944. The pattern was specific to the Cassino area. The historian interviewed veterans and found Dalton through Morrison. Dalton agreed to one interview. He explained the method, gave dates and details, then asked that his name not be used in the article. The historian respected that request. The article published in 1965 in the Journal of Military History said the invention was by unidentified NCOs in the 34th Infantry Division. James Dalton died in 1987 at age 63 from a heart attack in his living room. His death notice in the Gary Post-Tribune mentioned that he served in World War II and worked 41 years for U.S. Steel. It didn't mention tripwires, scout cars, or lives saved. Dorothy knew he'd done something important in Italy, but never knew exactly what. The method itself lived longer than the man. After-war analysis by Army engineers proved the idea worked. Wire obstacles at axle height were added to official rules in 1949 as an approved method for disabling light scout vehicles. The training manual credited field observations from the Italian campaign. Modern military forces still teach versions of the technique. IED countermeasures include wire-based vehicle traps. The principle hasn't changed. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. And sometimes soldiers in the mud know more than officers in headquarters. That's how new ideas actually happen in war. Not through committees reviewing plans and engineers running math. Through corporals who can't watch their friends die anymore. Through switchmen who learned to solve problems with wire and shovels because nobody was going to give them anything better. Through men who risked punishment to save lives and never asked for credit. The wire is still taught. The method is still used. But the man who invented it went back to the train yards and never told anyone. Sometimes that's exactly right. If you found this story interesting, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.